I normally print myself, and I printed enough copies. So let me record you. Yes, I record what he has said. I was signing the judgment. Yes, I've recorded him. Now you can say that's Mr. Macharia. Am I right?
Yes, my lord. I'm sorry. I asked my friend to read.
Sorry, I didn't record your attention since when I started. Yes, wait. I see what I recorded, even though.
Yes.
Okay, mainly for the second.
Mainly, I believe, is for the. My lord, I appear for the second.
Second. So Mr. Macharia was.
Third. And I appeared for these purposes together with Ken Ogeto.
Okay, I'll put you on record.
Yes, I know you. Okay, sorry, I would say. I know you also.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Mutinda. Fine, I've inserted the names in the quorum.
I don't know what my colleagues at times say anything about, but my instructions are to appeal.
That's really a legal right, so I don't even need whether I need to correct it. I'm to record it. It's a right conferred by the law.
Yes.
So that one you can exercise. And I like it when people go up also to get that other opinion.
Well, I think, my lord, when we did appear before you, we all grappled with very, very complex issues that faced you.
Yes.
I think you expressed that.
You didn't hear how I resolved them. You came late.
I have been following, my lord.
Yes.
But then the first right of appeal, my lord, then precedes the next application about May. I'll be seeking a stay of that decision of law.
Yes.
I know there's very limited time, my lord. But I know we could ban the midnight trial and have a record of appeal, if my lord, and perhaps even proceeding that proceedings. I don't know whether the
No. We actually.
And there you go. The court allowing Ekuru Aukot's name on the ballot paper on October 26th, and that obviously affects not just him but any other candidate who took part in the August 8th general election and would want to be included in that poll. Therefore, now have the green light to do so. This a significant decision that will certainly affect what IEBC may have to say in the course of the day, coming on the back of Raila Odinga's decision yesterday to remove himself from that election contest of August 26th. The question now being, can they argue that they cannot remove Raila's name when a court has now allowed any other party that was running for the presidential contest on August 8th now to be enjoined, to be allowed into the 26th poll? And of course, the big question being, will this 26th poll happen anyway? We're going to be trying to get answers for you very shortly with my panel, but let's just give you a quick round of where else we are present. Adjacent to me, of course, that's the Milimani Court where we've been. Right below my image, you have the Anniversary Towers, where, of course, as you can see, police are standing by, expecting very much protests like those that are adjacent to that Anniversary Towers image, live from Kisumu, to be taking place as NASA continues with its opposition of this poll that was scheduled, or that is still scheduled, for October 26th, one that they say will not meet the requirements of the law. And joining me now in studio for analysis on this, we have Jared Jagedo, who's the MP for Nyando, just joining us this morning. To my far right, we have also Mark Bichachi, who is a political communication strategist. Next to him, we've been speaking to earlier Patrick Meru, who's the MP for Laikipia West, and of course Anthony Oluoch, who's the MP Mathare. These gentlemen being advocates as well, and I thank you all. So let me return back to you, Anthony, because you were speaking. Let's get a quick reaction on what the court has said today and how this affects IBC, which is already in a very precarious position, on what they will have to say regarding whether an October 26th poll will still take place and under what circumstances at all.
Yeah, I think about 3 or 4 things that the court has said. First, it had to navigate the question as to whether it had the jurisdiction to entertain this, and I think the answer that he has returned is that the power to carry out interpretation, strictly speaking, belongs to the High Court. He has distinguished the powers of the Supreme Court in respect to what it can do in terms of interpretation, and he has said that in respect of the 2013 decision, there was a distinction between whether this was an advisory, whether it was given as a binding decision, what we call a ratio decidandi or obiter. So he has found that it was a comment made outside of the judgment itself. It did not come out of any of the pleadings.
And was therefore obiter. It
was obiter. Then he had to address the question then, whether or not obiter now binds him. Now, obiter being something that is said on the sidelines is of persuasive value. So he had to find or to skirt around the question whether or not he was persuaded. And I think he has returned the answer that for himself, fresh elections did not necessarily mean that people went to a nomination. So in essence, he has disagreed with the advice or the side comment of the Supreme Court that people have to go back to fresh elections. In the final analysis, I think he has said that this being a fresh election, I think not only Ekuru Aukot, but all the other persons then are allowed to. He has then given the directives that IEBC makes the necessary arrangements to make an addendum in the event that they had already printed the ballot of Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila to include not only Ekuru, but any other person who would be affected. Now, to the question as to whether these elections would go on the 26th, I think opinion will be varied. From where we stand, I think the NASA position has been, and that is what led to the withdrawal yesterday, is that the elections do not meet the standards. They are not the elections that were contemplated by the Supreme Court. All the necessary changes and the infrastructure that was necessary to ensure that the reforms were in place have not been put in place. The second and last point, which I'm sure will be very contentious from the discussions we've had off here, is that what is the implication of the judgments of the High Court coming at this time when there has already been a withdrawal? And my interpretation is there is already an occurrence that affected the legal and political landscape yesterday. There were two people who were gazetted to take part in that election, and that the judgment of today is inconsequential to the fact that the election that was announced for the 26th stood cancelled by the withdrawal of yesterday.
All right, and let me just, even as I come round to the panel, show you the complete picture of what's going on in Kisumu this morning. If we could just take a look proper at Kisumu right now, where those protests are underway by NASA supporters. This, of course, being emboldened by the decision of the coalition to withdraw from the election contest on October 26th. And so the protests, the outfit has said, would continue proper. And as you can see in Kisumu, they're already underway. We also have eyes at the anniversary towers in the capital, Nairobi, where, as you can see, police battle ready, as it were, to engage would-be protesters. We're not too certain where protests will begin this morning, but we have our eyes peeled here in Nairobi as well. So we're going to keep showing you this pictures, even as we await to see whether we'll be getting decision from IEBC today on what way forward for October 26th. So, Patrick, let me come to you. What's the position of Jubilee in this regard? IEBC's position being complicated further by the fact that they are to include any other presidential candidate who wanted to take part in this repeat poll that was ordered by the Supreme Court. What happens next? And can IEBC make this decision in isolation without going back to the Supreme Court to seek interpretation on what the withdrawal of Raila Odinga means to October 26th?
Good. And the judgment today has very serious implication. By design, it defines where we are going to. And by default, it addresses the occurrence of yesterday, the withdrawal of the NASA presidential candidate. It is so fundamental because it answers very many questions we had last night. Everyone in Kenya was wondering, where do we go from now? And I must thank God the judgment really addresses many of those. First of all, you remember that the withdrawal of NASA presidential candidate yesterday, the provisions that they were whipping around and flagging around was Article 143, as well as paragraph 289 and 290 of the Supreme Court judgment of 2013. In fact, the NASA presidential candidate himself, in the statement, did quote paragraph 289 and 290. Now today, the judge, in his wisdom, has addressed all that. I say it has defined the past by default of what happened to NASA presidential candidate yesterday, because he has categorically and very clearly stated that actually paragraph 289 and 290 of the Supreme Court judgment of 2013 was actually an obiter. An obiter to the ordinary man is basically on the side. You are going to town, but you see tall trees and short trees, and you keep saying, this street has tall trees. Now that is an obiter, it's not where you are going to. So what the NASA presidential candidate yesterday was quoting the trees, the tallness and the shortness of trees, rather than quoting where he is going to town. And so the judge has said he is actually not bowed. He is actually not persuaded by what the Supreme Court said in 2013. Because the Supreme Court actually had no business saying it anyway. It had no business interpreting Article 140 because that is within the purview of the High Court. The third thing is that, which is very fundamental and which really breaks down the action of NASA presidential candidate yesterday. He says there need not be fresh nominations. Now that is very serious. It's very fundamental to where we are as a country. And if there are no fresh nominations, it looks to me, even not to me, really to the country now, that the NASA presidential candidate and the NASA brigade really biding and hanging on Article 143 and paragraph 289 and 290 is superfluous. And yesterday's decision by NASA, it was a very risky gamble. That riskiness of
the
that
gamble
decision
hasn't paid off, you're saying? Has
now been confirmed. They took a very risky gamble, and now I don't know where they will turn to, because with the judgment. Now, the interpretation of the judge on Article 140 and 289 and 290, he says that it needs to be seen in a pragmatic manner, a manner that takes the country to the next level. And so the implication of this is that Ekuru Aukot and any other candidate that participated in 2017 presidential elections has a right to be part if they are interested. And so the immediate win is Dr. Ekuru Aukot. He should be included. Now, IEBC, in fact, I heard yesterday that IEBC were sitting, the commissioners and the legal team. This clarifies their path, absolutely. In fact, I expect a statement shortly, because I don't think they have hazy horizons for themselves now. For you, this is clarity. This is clarity. Okay. And they have no option but to include Ekuru Aukot. So we are seeing on 26th of October having two candidates, President Uhuru Kenyatta and Dr. Ekuru Aukot, if the others are not interested. All right. Hold that thought. I'm going to come very shortly to you, Mheshimiwa Jagedo, shortly, and we'll get comment from Mark. But let's just keep updating you with the events that we're standing by for. We can take you now live to the Supreme Court, where Francis Gashuri is standing by, and to the Anniversary Towers, where our reporter Patrick Igunza is also waiting to speak to us. Let's start with you, Francis. Good morning. So we are expecting the Supreme Court to be hearing the Chebukati petition, that by the IEBC chair, talking about the interpretation of his powers in terms of confirming forms. What can you tell us about this process? And of course, whatever is coming from the courts today comes on the back of NASA's withdrawal from this electoral contest. Can we expect more from the court today?
Most likely, and basically what the Supreme Court judges are expected to do today is to hear other parties making submissions in relation to the application that was made by IEBC Chairman Wafula Chebukati insofar as the question of his functions as the National Returning Officer for the presidential election is concerned, and specifically on the question of verification of results declared at the constituency level and announced at the polling station level. Remember, one of the areas that the Supreme Court touched on in its majority ruling was that they faulted the IEBC chairman for failing to verify the results that were announced at the polling stations and declared at the constituency level before making the final declaration on the presidential outcome. And so the chairman basically wants to know how much of this verification he can do. He basically wants an understanding, some clarity on this question of interpretation. That session was supposed to kick off at 10 a.m., but the lawyers sought some more time because of the case that was happening at, or the ruling that was happening at the High Court by Justice John Mativo. And so at around 11, that's when they are expected to kick off. The various parties will be making their submissions. Last week, you remember lawyer Paul Muita, representing the IEBC chairman, made a case and seeking clarity on the specific issues that he wanted. And so the other parties will be coming to make their submissions, and eventually the judges will give us a declaration of with finality on what basically the functions of the IEBC chairman will be insofar as the question of verifying the results is concerned.
Francis Kashuri, we'll be returning to him shortly for more once the hearings are underway. Patrick Igunza is standing by, watching, of course, for us the anticipation for NASA protests today at the Anniversary Towers, the IEBC headquarters. From where you stand, is there any action yet this morning? And do we know where protesters in Nairobi will be beginning their march from? Patrick, if you can hear me, have you been able to cite any protesters this morning yet? Tuko hewani, ni ukweli. Okay, clearly he can't hear me, but those are the pictures. We haven't seen protesters yet. We'll be returning to Patrick once we can establish our link, and I'm going to give it another go. Uko hewani, Patrick, what can you tell us about the situation at Anniversary Towers?
Thank you very much indeed, Lillian. Sorry for that slight technical hitch. Yes, we are here at the Anniversary Towers. It is the headquarters of the IEBC. As you can see from the images on your screen right now, we have police, men and women having actually taken position just to ensure that they are ready to contain the situation once we have the NASA protesters taking to the streets. It is highly anticipated that they will be making their way into the streets any time from now, but currently everything is calm. We don't have any cases or any indications that they are in the streets at this particular hour, but according to sources, we are given to understand that they will be assembling at the Uhuru Park, where they will have a brief session with their leaders, or a section of their leaders, and shortly after that brief session they will be taking to the streets. Remember, this is happening barely 24 hours after their presidential flag bearer Raila Odinga withdrew from the much anticipated October 26th repeat presidential polls. We wonder whether his decision actually not to participate in this particular presidential contest will either intensify or perhaps calm down these particular demonstrations from NASA supporters. This is something that we are waiting to see. We also have heard from police sources that they will be ensuring that every piece of this demonstration is done in accordance to the law, where there will be incidents of, let's say, property destruction. Those particular incidents will be taken care of in a manner that will deem fit as far as these law enforcers go. But they do expect that even the demonstrators will do what they say they will be doing. This is actually protest, but in a peaceful manner. So we are pitching camp here to see what will be happening, and should there be anything worth reporting about, then we will keep you posted, Lillian.
It's Anne, Patrick, but thanks. Okay, Jared, let me come to you now, and let's talk about all these events coming together. On one hand, we have the protests that NASA is going ahead with. What does that achieve when the presidential candidate has already pulled out of the race?
Well, thank you, Anne, stroke Lillian, for the opportunity.
Baptized.
Well, you know, many things have happened in the recent past, much of which have been occasioned by the determination by the Supreme Court to annul the presidential election. What came out quite prominently, even though Uhuru Kenyatta was found not to have committed any electoral offense. By the way, if that did occur, then he was going to be barred for a period of 10 years from any political contest. But in the wisdom of the Supreme Court, even though lots of issues were raised at the Supreme Court touching on usage of public resources and public officers, as in line with Article 260 of the Constitution, they said, you know, all those perhaps mere says. So Uhuru was left off the hook and his skin spared. But we were not in agreement with that decision. But, you know, what the Supreme Court then found out is that illegalities and irregularities were committed by IEBC, and that therefore created the election to be vitiated. So we are in the situation where we are today because of what IEBC actually did. If they followed the law to the letter, respecting Constitution from Article 81 to 86, touching on purity of elections, and they also worked in line with the electoral laws and other enabling statutes, we would not be here today. You remember, a very simple question was put to them to go and open the servers and respect some 21 orders, or rather interlocutory orders that were granted by the Supreme Court. Out of 21 orders, they only respected 7 and refused deliberately to provide the remaining 14 orders in respect of the dictates of the Supreme Court. So the country is where we are as a result of mistakes perpetuated by IEBC.
But why still
now, what NASA is saying,
go ahead.
What NASA is therefore saying is that as long as there is no credible and cogent commitment from the part of IEBC as so far as cleaning the electoral merchandise is concerned, then we are not going into this election. Now, what we are not stepping away from is to push IEBC to respect our demands. And these are not just NASA demands. You remember that the chair, in his capacity as the returning officer, the national returning officer, did write a memo to his CEO highlighting certain fundamental breaches that were committed during that particular vitiated election. Of course, to date, we've not been convinced, and the chairman is equally not convinced by certain reasons that were advanced by Ezra Chiloba. And if you look at what the European Union did state, they also advised IEBC to respect certain fundamentals that have been advanced by NASA. So this is not just about us. So what we are saying is that as long as we are not sure of a clean, credible, verifiable election, we will still push IEBC to the edge until they will respect the will of the Kenyan people.
And that's why the protests are still important. No, I'm going to come into your final point very briefly, but because we have to go to break. But Mark, let me just give you an opportunity to speak in this hour. I know you haven't. And of course, we're still standing by with those pictures from Anniversary Towers. But I mean, you've got to wonder what is going on with IEBC right now. So here they are. First of all, as rightly put by Jared, we're in this position because of IEBC, at least from the finding of the Supreme Court. Then you go ahead. This is Ekuru Aukot. Let me just bring to your attention from the Milimani Law Courts. I think he wants to address the press in respect to that decision. Let's listen into him and then we'll talk.
Okay, so